Personally, I do believe that the best way to go about getting rid of this banditry that we're talking about is mostly through intelligence. Intelligence can actually give us, who is involved in this thing.
But he said they know the people that are involved.
They should go after them. They don't need to. They don't need to bomb the hell out of innocent people in that area if the people who are involved are already known. If they know them and they know their location, it's a matter of carrying out some tactical SWAT operation in their location and get them apprehended, get them overwhelmed and get them apprehended, rather than the area bombardment that he's talking about. And most times area bombardments don't win wars, they don't win battles. At the end of the day, you have to have ground troops go in there door to door and fish out who the criminals are.
So we begin today's conversation taking our quote from Bertrand Russell, British philosopher, logician, essayist, and social critic, best known for his work in mathematical logic and analytical philosophy. He once said that war doesn't determine who is right, only who is left. All right, so we'll take our second quote, and this one is coming from William Westmoreland. He is a United States Army general, most notably commander of the United States forces during the Vietnam War from 1964 to 1968. He served as the Chief of Staff of the United States Army from 1968 to 1972. He once said, "The military don't start wars. Politicians start wars." All right, so we'll take our last quote, and this one is from Albert Einstein, German-born theoretical physicist, widely acknowledged to be one of the greatest physicists of all time. He once said, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War V will be fought with sticks and stones." Interesting, you say. All right, let's see how this all relate to what we will be discussing today. Warm greetings and welcome to The Conversation. We are reaching you from Captain's television studio here in the nation's capital, Abuja. I am Annabel Orji. Now, war is an intense armed conflict between states, governments, societies, or paramilitary groups such as mercenaries, insurgents, and militias. It is generally characterized by extreme violence, aggression, disruptions, and using of regular or irregular military forces. Now, on the other hand, warfare refers to the common activities and characteristics of types of war or wars in general. Now, total war is a warfare that is not restricted to purely legitimate military targets and can result in massive civilian or other non-combatants suffering and casualties also. Now, asymmetric warfare, biological warfare, chemical warfare, cold warfare, conventional warfare, cyber warfare, insurgency and counterinsurgency, information warfare, nuclear warfare, total war, and conventional warfare. These are the various types of war that exist. Now, what are the effects of war to any nation? The effects are quite humongous, from increased death toll to the economic quagmire, the psychoanalysis, military and civilian casualties, just to mention a few. For example, military personnel subject to combat in war often suffer mental and physical injuries, including depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, diseases, injury, and even death. Now, looking back in history from 1914 during the World War I to 1939 in the World War II, which was the most financially expensive conflict in history, the mortality of war has been the subject of debate for thousands of years. Most wars have resulted in significant loss of life, along with destructions of infrastructure and resources. Now on the show today, we will take a cursory look at some of these types of wars, its effects and lessons to take away with my guest. He is Captain Bishop Johnson, retired U.S. Army captain. He's also a security consultant and a political analyst. We get to see him in a while. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, this is The Conversation. We are reaching you from Captain's television studio here in the nation's capital, Abuja. If you just joined us, you've not missed anything as we're just about to get started. Our guest today is Captain Bishop Johnson. He's a retired U.S. Army captain. He is a security consultant and he is a political analyst. You're welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. All right, now let's get started. Let's start with the security situation here in Nigeria. Now, a few days ago, the Kaduna State Governor Nasir El-Rufai had disclosed that investigation revealed that some serving police and military officers have been linked with bandits terrorizing the state and the country. Now, according to some preliminary reports on the investigation of bandits and Boko Haram insurgency or financiers, it shows some link to bandits, and they pointed that some police and military officers who are still in service are having communications, some kind of communications or connection with these bandits. Now, there's always been that risk in any system. You have traitors, like they say, in every 12 disciples you always have the Judas, or probably the Judases, like they say. So how worrisome is this trend, and how can this be nipped in the bud?
Okay. It is not news that somehow our security agencies, a few bad apples in their midst, have been complicit in some of the criminal activities that are going on in the country. Nigerians have for a long time been talking about it, have been crying about it. There have been instances where specific individuals have been linked, who are serving in either our law enforcement and the security agencies have been directly linked to criminal activities. Now, the truth is that in every system, there's always going to be those bad apples. And unfortunately, it is always those bad apples that you're going to hear the most.
That they cry more than the bereaved.
Yes. So that is why we have to put in place a process or a system or a mechanism which ought to be effective in making sure that we are following up with those we give the assignment of protecting lives and property. Because to us and to most responsible countries in the world, that is the most basic function of government, ability of government to protect lives and property. And so government cannot take it lightly. It's not a light responsibility. And so we have to have a system in place that monitors those we give those enormous responsibilities. Because there are very few ways that these bandits can be getting the kind of weapons that they've been using. Is it that those weapons are coming through the border, in which case you still have security agents at that border who is supposed to stop them there. For example, the immigration and the rest of them at the border. So they ought
customs.
And customs. So they ought to stop them there. Or that there are factories in these countries that are manufacturing those weapons. In that case, the police has to do its job by tracking down those factories, arresting the people responsible and shutting them down. Or that there are rogue elements in our law enforcement and security agencies that are aiding and abetting them by way of supplying them arms and ammunition and providing them with intelligence. And the latter seem to be the case most of the times, is that we have some bad eggs who are working together with these criminal elements for their own selfish interests by providing them intelligence and at the same time providing them arms and ammunition. So It's not news.
Okay, so I hear you talk about the borders, and then we have customs and immigrations manning the borders. But then you recall that sometime last year, the borders were shut down for months because of this same issue, arms proliferation and smuggling and all. How much did that even do?
Well, when they say shutting down the border, they are talking about shutting down the legal channel through which people come in. There are over 1,500 illegal crossings just in the northern sector of Nigerian borders. So when they shut down the borders, they don't shut down all these illegal crossings. And these arms and ammunition will continue to flow into those illegal crossings. So whether the border is shut down or not, it does not have impact on those who are bringing stuff in illegally, because they don't follow the legal channel to bring all these things in. They pass through those illegal crossings, which comes down to the question of how effective are we manning our borders. You know, some of us have made the suggestions that we should even create a separate agency, border control agency, with the capacity and the assets to be able to man our borders, so that we can deal specifically with our own internal problems and not having to do with cross-border problems that are coming from all our neighboring countries that are already in chaos. You see what is happening in Burkina Faso, you see what is happening in Mali. All these Sahel countries are completely unstable and chaos and chaotic. So we have to have effective border control to be able not to allow their problems to spill into our own problems and exacerbate the problems that we're already dealing with in this country. So some of us have suggested having a separate agency, border control agency, because if you look at the Directorate of Border Security in Immigration, you discover that it's a very small, directorate, you know, in terms of manpower and the budget and asset. So with that kind of manpower, they will not be able to effectively man all of the borders of Nigeria. But if you have it as an agency of its own, they will be able to recruit a lot, you know, these young Nigerians who don't have jobs now, recruit them, train them, and then you can equally employ technology like flyover drones and stuff like that. I'm one of those who believe that we might even go to the point of even building electronic border fence in areas that can be difficult to, you know, to man, you know, by humans. We can build electric border fence in those areas to limit the illegal and transnational criminal activities that are coming into our country.
All right, now, so again, according to the governor, he preferred some solutions to end the banditry. That's the governor of Kaduna State, which he said it's like a simultaneous military and ground operations, as he said that. Because when, according to him, he said, because when the military bomb some of the forests, like in Zamfara, the Zamfara forest, they all move to Sokoto, and then when they get there, they move to Kebbi or Katsina or Kaduna. So he further said that although the simultaneous land and air assault in all the 5 affected areas, including Niger State, at the same time will be difficult, but then you have troops in the camp as a blocking force, which might actually lead to loss of innocent lives, especially for farmers and people that are around there. But his administration is willing to take that risk with the collateral damages that are attached to it to secure the state and its environs. So is this actually a great step in the right direction?
Well, I personally don't know how effective that the suggestion that he's making, I don't know how effective that will be. I don't know if Nigeria as at now has that capability to embark on such simultaneous operation as he is talking. But what I would like to say is that if we do that, without actually ensuring that those borders that you and I talked about earlier are equally effectively manned, these people may just cross over to the neighboring countries until after the operation, and they will come back again. So all of this in short. Most times, if you want to have a successful military or police operation of the kind that he's talking about, it would be nice to have all the operations going on simultaneously at the same time, so that there is no hiding place for the criminals. But to be able to do that effectively, you have to have enough manpower, you have to have enough military hardware, you have to also control the borders, because some of these states that we're talking about right now are border states. Like, for example, Sokoto is a border state, so it's easy for them to just, slip into the neighboring country and hide there until after the operations, and then they will come back. But it's worth trying, so long as the collateral damage is going to be, it's going to be low, or
can it ever be low,
or not at all, and that at the end of the day it solves the problem. But personally, I do believe that the best way to go about getting rid of this banditry that we're talking about is mostly through intelligence. Intelligence can actually give us, who is involved in this thing.
But he said they know the people that are involved.
They should go after them. They don't need to. They don't need to bomb the hell out of innocent people in that area if the people who are involved are already known. If they know them and they know their location, it's a matter of carrying out some tactical SWAT operation in their location and get them overwhelmed and get them apprehended, rather than the area bombardment that he's talking about. And most times, area bombardments don't win wars, they don't win battles. At the end of the day, you have to have ground troops go in there door to door and fish out who the criminals are.
All right, now let's talk about some of our highly celebrated security officials who have led major fights or war against insecurity and banditry. And then we see that these days they always have their hands in the cookie jar. So just when you're being looked up to as a role model, as a Supercop, and then you just have one story waiting behind. What exactly is the problem here? What exactly is it the problem of these people or the system generally?
It's a mixture of both. It's a mixture of the culture and the individual. You have to understand that our law enforcement and security people are Nigerians.
What is wrong with being Nigerian?
Well, we have a country where it's been very much acknowledged that it's fundamentally corrupt. I'm aware that you were aware when our president went for a summit in the UK, and it was said by the then Prime Minister that, some of the most fundamentally, corrupt countries, and Nigeria was mentioned, and nobody came out to dispute that. And you and I, we live here in Nigeria, we know that we are corrupt as a country. And all these people that are being recruited into our law enforcement and security are being recruited from the Nigerian population. And so they will be equally corrupt, since the country is already corrupt. And so it's a culture. It's a culture outside those law enforcement. It's a culture inside the law enforcement people. And so it's a very difficult place to be in. But with effective leadership, we can begin to mitigate and reduce some of all these problems and begin to change the culture in some of those institutions. I've always said over and over again that we can't get Nigeria right if we don't get our police right. We have to get the police right. If we get the police right and police is able to perform its basic function, if a constable can arrest a senator without having to face any consequences, until we can get to that point, this country is not heading anywhere. It's you people that call the man, they called him a super cop. I personally haven't seen what he did to have, earned that, phrase super cop. I didn't see it. This media, fringe where some people are elevated and given the honor that they don't deserve. How many of those individuals in those cases that he was involved have been prosecuted and convicted? You know, I don't know if you got my article. You know, with these things that are happening, as a matter of fact, I am one of the only person who has called for the Inspector General of Police to set up a review committee to look at all the cases that had been handled by DCP Abba Kyari, you know, following all these revelations. Because if the Capt himself is corrupt, so obviously it means that some of the evidences that he had used in prosecuting some of all these people may not be valid. There may be some elements of corruption in that whole process that would have tainted the cases that he has handled. There are some innocent Nigerians who are behind bars right now because of the activities of that man. So I still want to use this opportunity to call on the Inspector General of Police. I know he's a good man. I know he wants to do well for Nigerian police and Nigerian people, that he should constitute a review committee to look into, review every case that has been handled by Abba Kyari and his team, to ensure that no innocent Nigerian is behind bars suffering for something that they did not do.
Okay, so now if we keep talking about fighting corruption or insecurity, and yet these top-ranking officers that had their hands in the till are not dealt with, most times they only get demoted or they get soft landing, some kind of soft landing, especially here in Nigeria. We've seen that happen. While the ordinary man who commits the same crime or even less gets severely dealt with. So aren't we just deceiving ourselves or breeding stronger men instead of stronger institutions in the long run?
Yeah, that is what has been happening in the country. Is that we have, I think it was the former U.S. President Bill Clinton who said it, that we have stronger individuals instead of strong institutions in this country. And that seems to be what is happening in Nigeria. And that is why we find it very difficult to clean up the system, because the top 1%, you know, controls about 98% of the wealth in this country, at the detriment of the 98% that are controlling just about 2% of the wealth in this country. And so the people who ought to be the ones fixing the system are the ones who are involved in the corruption that we're talking about. So that makes it very difficult for us to fix the system, because the very people who are supposed to fix it are the ones that are corrupt. And so we need a very strong leader, somebody who is not one of the, from the political establishment, the so-called.
When you talk about strong leader, and what helm of affair are you referring to?
It has to come from the top. I'm talking about like the president and the commander-in-chief. You have a top leader who is not from the political establishment. He is not one of the so-called political elites, who comes from the outside and does what Jerry Rawlings did in Ghana, and clean up this system. Until we can get such an individual to come and clean this system, you will discover that each time you try to fix the system fights back, and it makes it difficult for us to fix the system, and it makes it difficult for us to solve the problem. And so that is the problem that we're facing in Nigeria, is that we have very strong individuals and very, very weak institutions. So those weak institutions cannot prosecute those strong individuals. And those, unfortunately, those strong individuals are the ones who are perpetuating and committing the most heinous crimes that you can ever think of in the country.
All right, so we keep hearing of repentant bandits and how they are being rehabilitated and re-socialized to the society. Just last we checked, there were reports of over 466 repentant bandits that have been re-socialized, even though some stakeholders have expressed concerns in that regard. So is it okay to give every sinner a second chance in heaven? And how would you actually even know if they would go back to lick their vomit? Well,
in similar instances, there had been places in other clans where people have been rehabilitated and absorbed into the society and then they didn't go back to committing the same crime. There's also equally been a situation where they rehabilitate them, release them into the society, and they go back committing that same crime. But you never know until you try. Now, it's not everybody who is a bandit or a terrorist actually wanted to be that. Some of them, certain circumstances they find themselves force them into it. Some are coerced, some are forced. You know, if you look at the chain of terrorists, not all of them willingly joined the terrorist organization. Some of them were forced into joining them. If you don't join us, we'll kill you or we'll go after your family. So those kind of people, if you can identify them, such people can be rehabilitated and put back into the system, and they become useful members of the society who will make, you know, positive impact and
but if they say that sorry to cut in on you there, if they say that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, some kind of power or some kind of leverage that you might be enjoying when you were there, don't you think that when they get reabsorbed, they just feel like we're not enjoying those kind of leverage anymore?
That is what you have to determine to what extent the person has been, you know, in debt into the crime. There are people that are just they're just at the periphery, you know. They are not fully into the criminal activity. Those kind of people, you can identify them and rehabilitate them and put them back into the society. But there are some hardcore elements that no matter what you do, there's nothing you can do to change them. It's just like if you go back to terrorism right now, it's just like for example, what's the name of the Boko Haram leader? Abubakar Shakau. You can rehabilitate him. You know, you cannot rehabilitate him. He is deep into the problem and he's deep into the organization. So those kind of people you can't rehabilitate. But there are some fringe elements who are not deep into the organization. Those people may not even have joined them willingly. They may have been forced into it. And those kind of people can be identified, can be rehabilitated, and can be put back into the society. Now, the area you're pointing out is the rehabilitation process. How do they rehabilitate them? What do they do to them? That is what is going to determine, in the instance where you say power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, determine whether they go back into crime to live the same life they had led before. But it's the rehabilitation process that is what is going to determine that, if these people are just fringe elements that are not deep into the problem.
Okay, now you have I saw a report somewhere in the news in the headline today saying that one of the bandit leader Orji was talking about that the increased insecurity has to do with government insincerity, and then you heard some people say that it's because they feel marginalized, that's why they go into these things. Is that any reason?
Well, it's not for anyone. We can't justify their actions and they can't justify their actions. However, look, an unjust system breeds insecurity. There are several factors that contribute to insecurity. And if you listen to what that individual is saying, there are some legitimacy in what he is saying. For example, if you are giving money to build factory that is going to hire hundreds of thousands of people, and instead of building that factory, you embezzle the money. What you have done is that you have shut off those people that could have been employed in that factory, who will be making a living through working in that factory. You've shut them off. Now they don't have means of livelihood and they must survive. And so if they must survive, they have to find a way to survive. And unfortunately, sometimes their way to survive leads them into committing crime. So all those things are interrelated. They are interrelated. Corruption is contributing to the insecurity that we have in the country. Corruption is contributing to our poor economic situation we are in the country right now. A rigged political system that does not carry everybody along is also contributing to that. So there's legitimacy in what the individual is saying, but that is not to justify the actions that they have taken. But if you want to solve a problem, you have to look at that problem holistically, remove sentiments. And when you do that and you sit down and analyze the problems, you will discover that all these factors contribute to the insecurity that we have in the country.
So if you have to fight insecurity, we should start with fighting corruption.
You have to fight corruption.
Okay.
Corruption is the reason why the police is not effective. Corruption is the reason why the army is not effective. Corruption is the reason why we are not building our infrastructures. And when we are not building our infrastructures, we are not creating employment opportunities. And when we are not creating employment opportunities, we are leaving out a large number of our young people who ordinarily would have been engaged, meaningfully. We are leaving them out. And they will sometimes resort to committing crimes. So all these things contribute to it. So if we must fix the security situation in the country, we have to look at corruption, because corruption is contributing to it. If you're giving money to go and acquire weapons for, say, Nigerian military, and you go there, you buy unserviceable weapons because you want to, take a shortcut and, save some money for yourself, you are not helping the military. You're not helping Nigerians. The same thing goes with the police. So you see how corruption is contributing to that.
Okay.
And so corruption is the bane of Nigeria's problem.
All right, we're due for a break, but before we go on that break, I'd like to get your thoughts now, because according to the Kaduna State Governor, he said that he was quoted as saying that the military are afraid of bombing bandits in the forest and having to face the International Criminal Court, because no general wants to retire and face the international communities for questioning. So if we have these fears put in place, how then do we tackle this pandemic, even though the bandits have been designated as terrorists?
Well, it must not be by bombing them. I've said something about area bombardment. If you watch now, you see what is happening in Ukraine. At the end of the day, some people may be charged for war crimes. You understand? Because area bombardment most often or sometimes do not get to the target. Instead, it gets to innocent people that have nothing to do with what you're doing. The best way to do this thing is not to carpet bomb every forest.
Everybody. Okay.
And kill everybody, whether you're involved or you're not involved. The best way to do this is, it will be painstaking, it will take a lot more resources, it will be more dangerous, is intelligence-driven activities that pinpoints to where the individuals are at the time they are there. You can focus your activities and your operations at that place.
Okay.
You can't bomb indiscriminately. You bomb indiscriminately, that fear that those generals are nursing will come.
Okay.
They will come to happen if you bomb indiscriminately, because you're going to end up killing the very people that you want to protect.
All right, then we're due for a break. Let's go on this quick break. And just because you mentioned Ukraine, we'll definitely come back to that story. Let's go this quick break, and when we return, the conversation continues in earnest. Don't move a muscle.
There will be a miscalculation in which the US-led NATO will be drawn into confrontation with the second most powerful military in the world, which is Soviet Federation. And if that happens, you have a third world war in our hands. And so far, US and its NATO allies have been very restrained from any activity that could lead to such miscalculation.
Welcome back. If you've just joined us, this is The Conversation. We are reaching you from Captain's television studio here in the nation's capital, Abuja. If you just joined us, you've missed quite a lot, because we still have our guest. He's Captain Bishop Johnson. He is a retired U.S. military captain. He is a security consultant and a political analyst. But you can then join in the conversation. All right, before we went on that break, we said we were going to talk about the Russia and Ukraine crisis. But before we go to that, let's talk about the shutdown of telecommunications network in some parts of the country, especially in the northeastern states. So was that actually a well thought out strategy, and how much did that even help? Anything?
Obviously, with the bandits still being able to carry out their activities and the operations, even as at the time that those telecom networks were shut down, means that it was not effective. You know, it was not effective. I don't think that should have been a means for them to fight those bandits, because when you shut down those telecom networks, you are equally limiting the ability of even law enforcement and security people to be able to equally communicate. And the military operations, communication is key, even though sometimes they have their own internal communication mechanisms, but some other times their own communication mechanisms leverages off the overall communication network. So when you shut it down, it will have some impact on their own ability to be able to communicate and fight the criminals.
Okay.
And from what is on the ground, I don't think that approach was effective, because it never stopped the bandits from carrying out their activities, even as at the time that those networks were shut down.
All right then, so let's divert a little bit and talk about the biggest issue on the global scene at the moment. That's the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is quite worrisome, as we're always seeing the latest developments as it unfolds every day. Now, from where you stand as a retired military officer, you have seen war situations, you've been at the battlefield, at the war front, and you know its ripple effects and all of that. And also coming from the disruptions, globally, coming from the disruptions caused by COVID-19 pandemic, what are your biggest fears?
My biggest worries now is that there will be a miscalculation in which the US-led NATO will be drawn into confrontation with the second most powerful military in the world, which is Soviet Federation. And if that happens, you have a third world war in our hands. And so far, you know, US and its NATO allies have been very restrained from any activity that could lead to such miscalculation. Because sometimes when these things happen, they happen without any warning or a plan. It's just by accident, something will happen, and then it will lead to a much larger conflict. You know, so far that has not happened. We pray that it doesn't happen, because that is the greatest fear. If you have Russia with the largest number of nuclear warheads and fighting it off with America that probably has the second largest number of nuclear warhead, and you have a nuclear war in our hands, which is what nobody wants to see that happen now.
Okay, so now a lot of people actually say that let Russia and Ukraine fight their battles and fight their wars and keep it to themselves. We have a lot on our own plate here in Nigeria. We have insurgency, which is also a type of war, and all of that. So for the benefit of such people, how much does this affect the Nigerian space?
I wish it's possible that the Ukrainians and the Russians will just have to deal with their own situation without it affecting us. But we live in a global village now. Everybody is interconnected one way or the other. Even our economics are connected to their own economics, whether it's Russia or Ukraine. All of us transact businesses with each other. If we don't transact with each other directly, we transact with those who transact with those. And so you see that all of the world's economics are interconnected, such that if there is a sneeze in the economy of, say, New York, somebody in Lagos will catch a flu. We catch cold in its own economy, because this is the way the world operates now. Everybody is interwoven and interconnected in one way or the other. And so what is happening in Russia, we can't isolate ourselves from it, unfortunately. As you have listened, the price of crude oil has gone up since the war began. And crude oil for us is our main source of foreign earning. We are supposed to make a lot of money.
It's supposed to be cashing out at this time.
Yes, it's supposed to be to our advantage. But unfortunately, because we have mismanaged this country, as it stands right now, we don't even have a functional refinery. And so what we do is we go to buy, refined products. So as we are selling our crude at a very high price, we are even buying the refined products from the same people we are selling them to at a much higher price. And so at the end of the day, there is no net gain for us because we have failed to plan our system. So, but had we planned this country better, the crisis would have been a cash cow for us, being that the conflict has driven up the cost of crude oil, which is our main foreign earner. So we could have capitalized on that. Okay. But fortunately we can't because we are not equipped to take advantage of the opportunities that have presented themselves.
Since that reverse is the case for Nigeria, what aside this problem, oil has gone, crude oil has gone shot up to 130. It was 139 per barrel the last time I checked, and then at today it was $130 per barrel. So now you know that it will also affect diesel, it will affect other things. And then back here in Nigeria, we have companies, manufacturing industries that make use of diesel. Someone was telling me that he actually got a liter of diesel at 500 naira just this week. So there are definitely the ripple effect. So how much will all of this still affect, apart from diesel? We still talk about fuel subsidy payments. How much will it also affect FAC, especially for states that are reliant on FAC?
FAC, you mean FAS?
Yes, the Federation account.
Okay. You know that even before the conflict, Nigeria was already having supply chain issue when it comes to petroleum products. One of the reasons we were told was because there was adulterated fuel in the supply chain. And so they had to shut down certain filling stations. And by so doing, disrupted the supply chain, which now created the impact that we are yet to recover from before the conflict began. And the conflict, because we don't have our own refineries, which was what I stated before, we are more now interwoven with these people. We are now more interwoven with these people than we ought to have been because of that. Assuming that we had refineries that are operating, because we produce crude oil ourselves. We will produce here and we will refine here, and you will see that we have enough for our domestic consumption. We will only be talking about the one we are selling, which ought to bring us more revenue. But because, and I go back to it, because those refineries are not working, even when we sell at a higher price, we sell our crude at a higher price, we still have to go back to buy the refined products at a much higher price. At the end of the day, there's a net loss for us. And so that is where it's going to affect us, because we get most of our refined petroleum products from Europe, and Europe is already in turmoil with this conflict in Russia and Ukraine. And so it will affect those countries that refine for us, and because it will affect them, it will also affect us who we go to buy from them. So it's a chain reaction.
All right, now seeing how much the federal government have, and that they're still making efforts to evacuate stranded Nigerian students there in Ukraine, and then some of them have been reunited back to their families. You still have some who are still there stranded. I was listening to someone this morning, and he talked about the fear that they have, because where they are, they're not even certain if the building will not be brought down in the next minute. So there's so much fears and tension. So now let's come back to Nigeria. Are there any form of security concern especially with all of this that are happening?
Security concerns for who?
For Nigerians. Should there be any form of security concern, especially since we are still talking about insecurity, insurgency. Should this Russia-Ukraine conflict, is there going to be a snowballing from there to Nigeria?
Well, not directly. What is happening there, if you're talking about Nigerians who are here,
yes, Nigerians here.
If you're talking about those who are in Ukraine, of course they face danger, so long as they are in a war zone. It's not a tea party. But for those who are here, I don't see any direct security impact on us. Most of the issues that we have in terms of security is not coming from Europe. It's coming from the Sahel. You know, those countries in the Sahel that are unstable, and their problems are flowing into Nigeria and contributing to the insecurity that we have in Nigeria, not Europe. So I don't see any direct security threat to Nigeria from what is happening in Ukraine now. Unless the situation changes tomorrow.
All right, so looking back in history from 1918 to 1938 and then 1939, where you had the First World War and then the Second World War, that's the World War II. Whenever this kind of clashes happen, there are lots of lessons to take away. So what are the lessons and the takeaways for you? And do you actually see this tension de-escalating anytime soon, and this cruel invasion likely to get protracted anytime?
I issued a statement calling on both Ukraine and Russia to return to a path of diplomacy, because I believe that the issues at stake cannot be resolved through the barrel of the gun. I do believe that they can maybe find solution through dialogue. And so to the extent that the Russians are still carrying out military operation in Ukraine, the West, led by the US, we continue to impose sanctions on them to make them pay for the war, and which eventually may destabilize Russia. So long as that circle continues and the diplomacy is not taking hold, I don't see that violence stopping anytime soon. Because Putin would not want to be seen as weak. If he withdraws today now, what is it that he has achieved? Why would he have deployed this number of military assets? And why would he? Because they're counting bodies now, soldiers that have been killed and those who have been captured. Why would they go through all of that, to turn around and withdraw without getting something? And how does he get that then? He will get it either he bombs Ukrainian people into submission, which I don't think is easy, because with all these Javelin and Stinger missiles, and there's a talk about even supplying the Ukrainian Air Force with fighter jets and stuff like that, it's going to prolong the whole thing. And this is what we learned from Iraq. Ukraine is a big country. One thing is to conquer them, and another thing is actually to, because when you conquer, you have to hold. You can, one thing is to conquer through this area bombardment and stuff like that, and another thing is actually to hold the conquered territory. And the Ukrainian population seems to be a very hostile population to the Russians, and so even if they conquer them, they will not be able to hold those territories, because they will have to be dealing with these same people that are that very hostile to them. We had that experience in Iraq. Within 72 hours, the U.S. military had already, conquered the entire country. But we all saw what happened. All hell broke loose. There were insurgencies here and there, and the United States was bogged down in Iraq. Because if you conquer, you have to make sure that government is running, you're providing electricity, there's running water, there's internal security, and all of those things are still going to come from the same internal people who are resistant to you. And so how do you achieve that? So the best thing is to get back to a negotiation table, look at the complaints of, security concerns for Russia, and look at the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians want to be independent. They want to be able to join any organization they want to join and be able to trade without having the shadow of Russia all over them. So, but there can be a compromise. We can reach a middle point there. And the middle point for me, if they allow me to suggest, is to have a situation where the Ukrainians are able to join the European Union, which is more of an economic bloc, which is what they are looking for, and not join NATO, in which case the Ukrainians have satisfied their desire to be Europeans, and Russia has been able to have Ukraine not join NATO, and there's that buffer between Russia and the NATO. That is my suggestion. And if they can take it, maybe and sit down and talk, and they can reach such a compromise and take it, I think we'll see the war come to an end.
Ooh, but then, since there's no telling or estimations on when this crisis will actually end, so what, in your view, could be done by other countries like the US, UK, Germany, France, and other bigger nations to stem this tide? Even though you had the US president offer to help, but then I read somewhere where the Ukrainian president Zelensky actually said that I need ammunitions, not a ride. So we also saw how the assistance coming from Elon Musk and then some other countries who has pledged support for Ukrainians. So what other kind of assistance could could be rendered regardless of the Russian president's threat that no country should interfere?
They're already rendering those assistance to the Ukrainian people. As a matter of fact, right now, there's a request to Congress right now for $10 billion in aid, as aid package to the Ukrainian people. There were $200 million aid package to the military assistance package to the Ukrainian people. There was another $350 million, and now the president of the US is asking for $10 billion. And so they have been rendering those assistance to the Ukrainian people. America has been providing them with Javelin and the Stinger missiles. So what I'm saying is that those assistance are already being rendered. You've seen how the Europeans opened up their countries, and they're receiving, Ukrainians who are crossing over, trying to leave the conflict zone, waiving some of their laws to be able to accommodate all those people. And so those assistances are being rendered. Nobody can stop this war except Putin. If Putin makes the decision to end the war today, the war will end today, because it's Putin's war. He started it.
Okay, but then according to him, sorry to continue, according to him, he was quoted as saying that the imposition of sanctions is a declaration of war. That's what he said. So this sanctions that has been imposed by some other countries, and then you also hear that no-fly zone from some countries. So does that, how much, some people actually said that Russia would actually have developed alternatives by now if they haven't. So then it means that the world might likely have to exhaust her arsenal in the sanctions and condemnations and boycotts and every other thing than military action against Russia. But yet there won't be a third war. What do you make of that?
There's never been this level of sanctions imposed on any country before. The sanctions they impose on Russia are stiff, and these are some of sanctions that have not been tried before, and those sanctions are already having impact on Russia. One thing is that sanctions do take some time before the impact will be felt, but there is no doubt that the sanctions that the West have put together, no time have the West been this united in imposing sanctions on a particular country. Even Germany, look at Germany, for example, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that nobody thought that they would suspend. They suspended it. And so the sanctions definitely, over time, we have impact. And I go back to this. It's not the sanctions that began before the war. the war started before the sanctions. So it's Putin who invaded Ukraine that started the war. Had he not invaded Ukraine, there would not have been any sanction, right? So they're making this tonight a question of the chicken and the egg. Which one came first? Okay. Now, Russia went into Ukraine. The West, US and its allies now impose sanctions on Russia. So it's Russia. If Russia withdraws today, maybe the countries that impose the sanctions may have to review those sanctions that they impose on it. Who knows?
So now we always hear that there are like in every war situations there are the kinetic and then the non-kinetic side to it. And then aside that, we'd like you to help us understand what this means. That's one. I'd like you to take that. I would have two questions and I'd like you to take them in one breath. So that's one. And then secondly, in all of this, I hear you talk about how much this will affect people, not just the military, not just Nigerian students, not just people around that are affected, how much it will affect them psychologically. So apart from all of this, there's always the trauma, the psychological effects. How do we begin to manage all of this? People coming in that are being evacuated and brought back to Nigeria, they've seen things, or people that go back to their country, they've seen things that they've not seen before. How do you begin to manage them, aside giving them stipends to go back home? There should be some kind of mental cleansing or something.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let me first and foremost deal with the issue of kinetic and non-kinetic. Kinetic is military operation, right? Like what is happening in Russia right now, where there is bombing, you know, artillery, fighter jets, they are shooting people, tanks, all of that that's the kinetic. Okay. Right? Now, the non-kinetic is where you use non-military method, you know, to equally wage a war, right? Such as like the economic sanctions that the US are imposing on Russia. You know, all those ones are, you know, non-kinetic. Okay. Okay, so that is basically the difference. The difference is using other means other than military, you know, aggressiveness. That is the non-kinetic. Now, as far as like the second question that you asked, I don't know the level of trauma that Nigerian students there had faced, you know. However, we should have assumed that maybe they could have, while they were there, faced some kind of conditions that they've never faced before that would have affected them psychologically. Maybe as they are returning to Nigeria, there will be some kind of debriefing for them, you know, to assess their mental status and mental and psychological status, and be able to render them what necessary assistance they may need other than financial. You know, I think that should be it will be proper if we do that. Okay. I don't know that we are not doing that. I don't know. It's possible they are doing that at the airport. I wouldn't know, because, you know, I have not followed that process, and I'm not. It's possible they are doing that. You know, it's equally possible that being Nigeria, what it is, they are just now giving them money to. Should it be a one-time thing or like a follow-up situation? It can be follow-up depending on how much, you know, they are affected. You know, I don't think they were really impacted like that, because these were students. Had Nigeria, that's why I said, look, we should not always be reacting to situations. We should always be preemptive. Had we listened to when warnings were being given, because the US was giving warning day by day, every day they were releasing information that there's imminent war, that Russia was planning to invade. Had we acted that time and evacuated all of our students by that time, maybe wouldn't have even be any need for the evaluation that you're talking about. So I don't know how they were impacted while in Ukraine. It's individual assessments that will determine the level of mental impact or psychological trauma they may have been subjected to.
So before we let you go, there's been this argument saying that America has the largest military ammunition, or military-based ammunition and submarine, and then the other part says that it is Russia. For you, very quickly, what's it for you?
Well, the U.S. military is the one that I served. And so, of course, I will always say that the U.S. is second to none, not Russia. And by the way, this is not the first time that the U.S. and Russia has fought. You know, there was Cold War between the U.S. and USSR. USSR, which people are suspecting that Putin is trying to reconstitute, as you know, collapsed. And some of those countries are now members of NATO. So we have been in this situation before, and the United States of America had prevailed. And America will also prevail in this instance again.
All right, then. Thank you so much for your time with us, Captain Bishop Johnson. It's been a wonderful time having this talk with you.
Thank you very much.
All right, we have been chatting with Captain Bishop Johnson. He is a retired U.S. military captain. He is a security consultant and a political analyst. And it's been a wonderful time here on The Conversation. I'm sure you must have been entertained, informed, and rightly educated. I will see you again next time. From the nation's capital, Abuja, I am Annabel Orji. God bless Nigeria.